There is a single truth a narcissist will never admit out loud. They spend their whole existence hiding it behind charm, behind sudden explosions of rage, behind long stretches of silence, and behind tears that always seem to arrive at the most convenient moment. Here is that truth. A narcissist is not actually rattled by your anger. Your tears do not scare them. Your ultimatums about leaving do not shake them either, because they have already sat through all of that 100 times before, sometimes with you, sometimes with someone before you. So what actually terrifies them? What shakes the unstable foundation buried underneath all that bravado? It is the exact moment you stop giving them a reaction. It is the moment you look straight at them and finally see who they are, without the fog of confusion clouding your judgment. It is the moment your eyes stop searching for their approval and simply start observing their behavior for what it is. Because in that instant, a mechanism they have depended on for years starts to break down. The illusion they built around you collapses, and whatever quiet pattern of control and manipulation had been feeding off your energy suddenly realizes it is looking at someone who can no longer serve as a source of supply. That is the exact moment a narcissist begins acting in strange, erratic, and highly specific ways. Once you learn to recognize this pattern, you understand something most people never grasp in their entire lives. The narcissist was never the one holding the power. You were. They simply worked hard to make sure you never found that out. Before we go any further, do something important for yourself. If you have ever been manipulated, gaslit, or emotionally drained by someone who claimed to love you, follow this channel right now, not for anyone else's sake but your own, because what comes next may permanently change how you see every narcissist you have ever encountered. Most people never realize that narcissists do not operate on love, logic, or even genuine hatred. They run entirely on control. Control functions as their oxygen. It is the one thing that keeps the hollow emptiness inside them from consuming them whole. And their primary method for securing that control is by studying you closely. They study your insecurities, your hopes, your old wounds, your loneliness, and your very human need to be understood. Once they have gathered that information, they quietly position themselves as the solution to everything you have ever felt was missing in your life. That is the reason the early stage of the relationship felt so magnetic and intense. It was never real love. It was reconnaissance. They were mapping the terrain of your inner world so they could later use that map as leverage against you. And the moment you begin healing, the moment you start becoming familiar with yourself again outside of them, that map turns useless. Their influence starts to lose its grip. And that is precisely when their behavior begins to shift in ways that can look almost bizarre from the outside. Pay close attention here, because this is the part that changes everything. When a narcissist senses their hold on you loosening, they do not respond with reflection or humility. They respond with panic disguised as dominance. They might suddenly go cold or suddenly become overly affectionate without warning. They might disappear without a single explanation, or flood you with a level of attention you never asked for and do not want. They pick fights over nothing at all. They dig up old wounds to use against you. They accuse you of things you never even considered doing. They attempt to rewrite history right in front of you, fully expecting you to flinch, to question your own memory, and to fold back into the small shape they once carved out for you. And when you refuse to fold, when you hold steady, when your gaze stays calm and unshaken, something inside them begins to unravel, because their entire sense of self depends on your reaction. Without it, in a very real sense, they stop existing the way they need to. Here is the part almost nobody discusses. A narcissist is not a strong person pretending to be weak. A narcissist is a deeply frightened person pretending to be a god. Underneath the arrogance, the calculated cruelty, and the icy distance sits a wounded, fragile inner self that never learned how to feel secure in its own skin. That is the real reason they need to dominate, why they need to humiliate, why they crave constant admiration and obedience, and why they can never tolerate being questioned. When someone who has done the hard work of healing, someone who has learned their own worth, walks into their life and refuses to bow down, The narcissist experiences something close to existential horror because for the first time, they are forced to confront the very thing they have spent their entire life avoiding: their own internal emptiness, their own smallness, and the crushing weight of their own shame. What happens next tells you everything you need to know about them. The first sign that a narcissist is losing their grip is a sudden, irrational surge of rage. It is not anger with a logical trigger. It erupts out of nowhere, wildly out of proportion to whatever supposedly caused it. And it is usually aimed at something small: a tone of voice they dislike, a slow reply to a message, a gently stated boundary, or a moment when you did not laugh at their joke. That rage was never really about what you did. It was about what you stopped giving them. You stopped giving them fear. You stopped giving them submission. You stopped supplying the emotional fuel they had grown used to pulling from you. So they escalate because in their distorted internal logic, if charm no longer works, intimidation must be the next move. And if intimidation fails too, then destruction becomes the plan. The second sign is a sudden and deliberate withdrawal. This shows up as the silent treatment, the cold shoulder, the disappearing act, or that unsettling blank stare across the room. To someone unfamiliar with these tactics, it might look like plain indifference. But what is actually happening underneath is the exact opposite of calm. They are punishing you for your independence. They are trying to make you feel invisible, abandoned, and desperate for their return. They are testing whether that old wound you carry, the fear of not being loved, not being chosen, not being enough, is still strong enough to pull you back to them. And if you stay grounded, if you refuse to chase them, if you do not break the silence first, you have accomplished something a narcissist cannot stand. You have proven that their absence has no power over you, and that is a blow to their ego that lingers for a long time. The third sign is blame shifting that turns almost theatrical. Suddenly, every single problem in the relationship becomes entirely your fault. Every cruel comment they made only happened because you supposedly provoked it. Every lie they told was somehow your fault for not trusting them enough. Every act of betrayal occurred because you failed to love them correctly. This is not really an argument between two people anymore. It is a calculated psychological maneuver. The narcissist is trying to reinstall old feelings of guilt, shame, and self-doubt into your mind, because without that background noise running quietly in your head, you become unreachable to them. You become unbreakable. You become free. And freedom in someone they once controlled is something they cannot allow to exist in peace. The fourth sign is the smear campaign. Once every attempt to manipulate your mind directly has failed, the narcissist turns their attention outward. They begin talking about you behind your back, to friends, family, coworkers, and sometimes even to your own children. They paint you as unstable, cold, selfish, or ungrateful. They flip the narrative so convincingly that even people who have known you for years start looking at you with doubt. What most people going through this never fully understand is that the smear campaign is not really an attack on your reputation at all. It is a desperate attempt to rebuild the cage you escaped from. Because if they can convince the people around you that you are the problem, maybe they can eventually convince you of that too. The smear campaign is, at its core, the dying roar of a predator that has already lost its prey. If any of this is landing for you, if it is reaching something buried deep inside, follow this channel right now, because everything ahead is meant to help you take back what was taken from you. Drop one word in the comments below, just one word: awake. Most people never realize that emotional independence is the single most threatening force in a narcissist's entire life. It is not your money, not your status, and not even the threat of you leaving. It is your emotional independence. The moment you stop needing their approval, their validation, their attention, or their permission to feel okay about yourself, you cut the cord they were feeding through. And a narcissist without a steady feeding source becomes deeply unstable. That is exactly why they grow more aggressive, not less, once you begin healing. This aggression is not a sign of their strength or eventual victory. It is a sign of their total desperation. They are searching for any new way to plug back into your life because they can sense their old methods failing. Picture them as a house of cards. They spent years constructing this elaborate structure, and your emotions, your reactions, and your validation were the glue holding it together. The moment you withdraw that glue, the structure starts to wobble. They feel the ground shift beneath them. They look at you and realize you are no longer someone they can control. And that realization is what makes them erratic. They lash out searching for any reaction at all. Because even a small one gives them the energy they need to stay afloat and reestablish some hold over you. This is why staying calm, staying neutral, and refusing to get swept into their chaos is your most powerful tool. When you hold your composure, you are essentially holding up a mirror to their own emptiness, and there is nothing they find more unbearable. As you continue healing, remember that in their mind, your healing looks like their starvation. Your peace looks like their famine. Your self-respect feels to them like exile. They do not want you well. They want you dependent and reactive. Because the healthier you become, the more dangerous you become to the version of you they built inside their own head. This next part matters just as much. Boundaries were never meant to function as walls that shut people out. Boundaries work more like mirrors, reflecting back exactly how someone must treat you if they want to remain in your life. Holding a boundary is not cruelty. It is clarity about your own worth. And a narcissist despises this because for the first time, they cannot find a way around your resolve. They cannot convince you that their poor behavior is somehow your responsibility. When you stay steady and decline to engage with their attempts to pull you into chaos, you are closing the door on their influence without needing to say a single word. You are telling them that you, and only you, control your own emotional state. And that removes the power they once took from you early in the relationship. They may escalate their efforts, threaten you, or attempt to play the victim to win your sympathy one final time. But if you hold firm, you begin to see them clearly for what they actually are. Someone terrified of their own shadow. Someone who needs others to feel small so they can feel large. This realization is not meant to generate pity for them. It is meant to help you see that you never had to endure what you went through. You are always worthy of kindness, respect, and love without hidden strings attached. As your independence deepens, their influence over you fades naturally. They may move on to someone else because they can no longer draw anything from you. You become the one who got away. And because that reality is unbearable for them, they will likely construct a story where the failure was entirely yours. That story belongs to them, not you. You carry the truth, and the truth becomes the foundation of a life that finally belongs to you again. A narcissist cannot tolerate the existence of mirrors. Every time you set a boundary, no matter how gently you phrase it, you force them to see themselves with total clarity. You force them to confront the reality that you have a self, a center, a soul that exists entirely apart from them and was never theirs to command. That truth is unbearable because in their internal world, you were never seen as a fully separate person. You existed as a function, a source of supply, admiration, and emotional regulation for them. When that function begins to say no, when it starts living an independent life, the narcissist experiences something close to profound betrayal. This is the reason they respond to boundaries the same way most people respond to physical violence, because in their mind, a boundary feels exactly like an attack. Your decision to say no reads to them as the destruction of their entire universe. Here is the piece almost nobody talks about. Underneath every narcissistic behavior, every insult, every stretch of silence, every guilt trip, every lie, every smear campaign, and every explosive burst of rage, there is one emotion running the entire operation: fear. A narcissist lives in a near constant state of psychological dread. They dread being exposed for who they truly are. They dread being seen clearly. They dread being ordinary. They dread abandonment, and they dread confronting the fact that the self they constructed for the world is fundamentally hollow underneath. The only method they know for managing that dread is pushing it outward, forcing someone else to carry it for them. For a long time, that someone was you. The reason your healing terrifies them so deeply is that the moment you set down the fear they handed you, they are left with no choice but to feel it themselves. And they would rather destroy the relationship entirely than sit with that feeling. Once you understand this fully, every one of their behaviors starts to look different. The sudden rage is not strength, it is panic. The cold silence is not power, it is punishment born from fear. The blame shifting is not confidence. It is a desperate attempt to keep their mask glued in place. The smear campaign is not real influence. It is the sound of someone losing their grip on reality entirely. The terrifying figure you once feared starts to resemble exactly what they always were, a frightened person shouting from inside an elaborate costume. And once you see that clearly, you cannot unsee it. Once you cannot unsee it, they lose their hold over you completely. Here is where things get even more revealing. A narcissist's deepest fear is not actually you walking away. It is you becoming someone they no longer recognize. The version of you they were drawn to needed them desperately, doubted its own instincts, apologized too quickly, gave far more than was ever returned, and stayed far longer than it should have. When you transform into someone who knows their own worth, who moves through life calmly, speaks plainly, holds boundaries without guilt, and chooses peace over chaos, that new version of you becomes a stranger to them. And strangers cannot be manipulated using wounds that belong to an older version of you. The new you has rewritten the entire language of the relationship, and the narcissist simply cannot read it anymore. This is exactly why your healing is the single greatest threat a narcissist will ever face. Not revenge, not public exposure, not even the fact of you leaving. Revenge can be twisted into a story about your cruelty. Exposure can be reframed as your bitterness. Your absence can be rewritten in their mind as their own sudden liberation. But healing cannot be touched. It cannot be spun into a lie, and it cannot be argued with. A person who has genuinely healed behaves like a sealed door. They do not chase. They do not beg for explanations. They do not perform for anyone's benefit. They simply live their life, and in that quiet, ordinary living, the narcissist sees something they can never build for themselves. Nothing haunts a narcissist more than watching the very person they tried to break walk calmly into a life of peace that remains entirely out of their own reach. Self-respect is the quietest, most devastating tool you will ever carry. Not the loud or performative kind, but the deep, internal kind that never needs to announce itself and simply refuses to bend. When you genuinely respect yourself, manipulation loses any surface to grip onto. Guilt trips slide off without leaving a mark. Gaslighting fails to take root because you trust your own perception of reality more than their distorted version of it. Flattery stops moving you because your sense of worth no longer depends on borrowed words. Threats stop shaking you because you have already released the fear of losing something that was hurting you in the first place. Self-respect makes you unreachable in every emotional place a narcissist used to walk freely. And here is something worth remembering along the way. You were never weak for being manipulated in the first place. You were open, trusting, and genuinely loving in a world that taught you love should be returned in kind. A narcissist did not target you because you were flawed or broken. They targeted you because you carried something bright, something they could never generate on their own. Real warmth, real depth, genuine empathy, real loyalty, and a capacity to feel deeply. They entered your life to take, not to give, because they could never create from within themselves what you already carried naturally.